Thank you. All right, we will move on to our special presentations. The 2022 bond referendum, Mr. Nasser, good evening.
That's the hang on. Check, check. All right. Can everybody hear me? Good. All right. Thank you for having me tonight. Let me introduce myself. My name is Adam Nasser. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Ed. I am also the Chairperson of the Finance and Facilities Committee. I'd like the folks behind me to introduce themselves. I apologize. I want to try to talk to everybody here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Sherry Tracy with Phoenix Advisors. We are the municipal advisor to the district.
Good evening, everyone. Tony Solomini from Wilentz, Goldman, and Spitzer, and we are the district's bond counsel.
So tonight we're here to discuss our bond referendum. Specifically, we are going to be talking about and what is on the agenda is two questions. If you refer to your handouts, which we would have to put onto the ballot as an informational and explanatory statement that people vote on. It is divided into two questions. Tonight we're going to go over what those questions are, what some of the projects encapsulated within it. We're going to go over a little bit of history and also what the financial implications of these types of questions outline. I'm going to ask if you all have anything to say, please chime in. I'll, if I need anything, I'll look back and give you the thumbs up. So let's go on to the first slide. There we go. All right, facilities assessment. We want to talk about where we started. So back in 2019, our architect and us did a detailed facilities assessment of all of the buildings, looking specifically at the building systems such as fire alarms, such as boilers, plumbing, electrical systems, building envelope and interiors. Building envelope, for those not familiar, is the bubble which essentially separates the outside environment from the indoor environment. In interiors, that would be finishes, program needs, in other words, things that are specific to curriculum, instruction, and other, our academies, for instance, and site and athletics, which is grounds and other playing surfaces. That detailed assessment produced a document that later became our long-range facilities plan. Our long-range facilities plan is something that we have on file with the state that allows us to take advantage of our capital reserve, in other words, our savings that we have set aside for capital projects, and also if we do decide to go out for a referendum, the Fund 30 accounts, which our referendum funds would reside in. The long-range facilities plan is needed to get approval from the state to use these funds, so we needed to have an overall overarching vision of what our district needs were. Within the scope of looking at the referendum and the list of projects, we pulled directly from that. In other words, we boiled it down to what we felt were the most essential projects and ones that we could take advantage of any offsetting state funds as part of the financing mechanism. Let's go to the next slide. So within that facilities assessment, the projects were broken down into 3 categories. The highest priority were high critical systems, health and safety systems, any code compliance issues that we had. Priority 2, not as critical. Some of them have to do with program needs, more comfort issues, and long-term programming needs when we look at a curriculum. And then priority 3 addresses aesthetics and other issues that fall outside of priority 1 and 2. Some of that may be, for instance, energy efficiency and other projects that aren't pushed into those other 2 categories of criticality. So, question 1. This includes the highest priority items. There is no impact due to the retiring debt that is rolling off of our books in 2023 and 2024. We had a previous bond issuance, and I'm going to look back here to my bond team.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and so the reason that this is possible exactly is that this goes all the way back to the 1998 bond issue that was done, then refunded several times over the course of the life, but is now paid off, is being paid off. And so because that debt is retiring, as well as another bond issue that was done in 2002, those issues are now paid off. And so all the projects contained within question 1 can be done while the tax rate for debt service, what residents have been paying, for the last 20 years, say, will remain the same. It just replaces, the new debt just replaces the old.
Okay, and dig into a little further detail on an average assessed home in Wall Township at $483,357. The annual portion of your property taxes that go to pay off this debt service is $185 a year. That's about $15.50 a month. We're proposing in question 1 to make it debt neutral is renewing that debt, $185 a year, $15.50 a month, so that it's a net neutral proposition. All of the projects in the first question have been approved by the Department of Education have been approved by the Department of Education for debt service aid, meaning our debt service payments are in part funded by the state. These include HVAC, electrical, fire alarms. There's some certain classroom alterations that fall into that category. Toilet room alterations, especially ones dealing with code compliance, ADA upgrades, roofing, and windows.
Mr. Nasser, if you don't mind me just
Absolutely.
interjecting there, I just want to highlight that point, that part's huge. Having all of these projects, that 34%, that's the maximum aid that the state gives for districts that don't already receive a high level of aid. So Wall doesn't receive state aid at that regular state aid for normal type of aid at that level. That is the highest maximum amount that a district could receive for projects, and it's on both the principal and the interest. So it's debt service aid. So every year after the bonds were sold, essentially the state's paying for a little more than a third of the total cost of the project, both principal and interest. So I just wanted to point that out because that's that's huge, and that's not something that can happen with a regular capital project that's funded through the budget. That aid isn't available for that. It's debt service aid only tied to when you issue debt for bonds.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So this next slide is a summary of what the roll-up of all the individual budgets are for question one. In your packets, you all have in front of you, and this was posted online today because we just updated everything, is the underlying itemized project list for each one of these projects. Our architect will be here on the 15th, so if you have more detailed questions about the individual line items, there's going to be an opportunity then, and then another opportunity at the end of the month to ask questions on the individual things. For right now, for time's sake, we're going to look at an overall breakdown per school of the 5 different categories within question one. Building envelope, about 14 million. Building systems, mostly HVAC and supporting systems, in other words, electrical upgrades, plumbing upgrades. You're looking at 24 million and change. Program needs, a lot of that is the art rooms. There was art rooms, there were some upgrades to the auditorium here. There's upgrades, I believe, to the auditorium over at the intermediate school. So program-specific needs, building interiors, and then the final column is a roll-up of across at each school. I do want to note that this particular summary includes both 15% contingencies and 15% for soft costs. What does that mean? Contingencies are a buffer. These projects, and we'll talk about timeline in a little bit, are going to be in the future. So we have to look at what potential escalation costs with inflation, with any potential, things aren't going down in price, let me put it that way. So we have to try to hit a moving target in the future. Normally, 15% is where we'll budget. That's industry standard, and I believe in certain cases, state law. But also, soft costs, those are your design, your architectural fees to create the final specifications that actually go out to bid and then people bid on. Let's go to the next slide. Question 2. This is very important. Question 2 is contingent on question 1 passing. In other words, question 2 in and of itself cannot pass on its own. It's only able to pass if question 1 is approved. We did that because the projects in question 1 are critical. They're debt neutral. They are what we as an F&F committee and hopefully as the board here tonight have determined to be what has to get done. Question 2 is above and beyond that. So for the average home assessed at, again, 483, 357, that equates to $60 a year additional above what is being paid now. It equates to about $5 a month. Of that $13.5 million, $5.9 million was classified as projects that qualify for debt service aid, so we will get some state funding for that. The other $7.6 million, having to do mostly with site paving and athletics facilities upgrades, did not qualify. So we still wanted to include them as an option, but we won't get that debt service aid as part of that. We will be funding that 100% through the bond. So this is a breakdown. Each school. The good news is Central Elementary School, Wall Primary School, we've been able to get enough of that capital project need out of the way ahead of time. So there's no question to costs in that question for those 2 individual schools. The carryover in the other categories I think the major one that I want to just point out is the site work over at the Wall High School. That is mostly made up of costs to redo our athletics facilities, specifically the track, football field area, and practice areas, with access, with, I mean, the track, anybody that's been down to the track knows that it's not usable at this point. It's been, what, 10 years since we had a home meet, which is troublesome. So within the breakdown that is online on this sheet, online, you can see how we budgeted for it. Again, I want to stress, and I was talking with another board member today, great conversation about what we're voting on. We're voting on budgeted costs. We're not voting on what may actually get spent on a project. We are approving budget allocations for each individual project. Let's go to, oh, I'll put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that statement because that's important. Can you go to the next slide? So, bottom line, these are projects that we are going to have to get done one way or another. Because they're of such high priority, using this funding mechanism is the most cost-effective way to do that. This doesn't pass, we're looking at using our operational budget. Our operational budget cuts into our operational needs on a year-to-year basis as we build our budget. We pay 100% of the costs. We would lose out on that $20 million in state aid. Also, too, because we have to break up the projects in a more differentiated fashion, those projects lose their economy of scale. A good example to illustrate that is anybody that drove down the road a few months ago when they were doing the parking lot out here, saw the county mobilized with all the equipment out there. That costs thousands of dollars to move from project to project. The more projects like that we can group together, it lowers the costs of overhead and enables us to get better pricing. So that is also a piece of it when we're talking about roofs, a lot of square footage, paving, those types of projects. Next slide. All right, so I said put a pin in it because what does the timeline look like if this passes? So from a referendum standpoint, we authorized the special election on September 20th. Tonight, we're looking at the individual questions, specifically that would be on the ballot, and December 13 would be a vote on those individual questions. If that referendum were to pass and we were to bond the money, there is a design phase that would occur starting immediately in January of 2023. We do that because this is a lot of work and we're going to have to phase it over the next 3 years. The first phase specifically taking place next summer with some of the highest priority items. When we get into phases 2 and 3, there is going to be some additional input that we need from the staff, from the community, in order to create designs and create projects that are going to fulfill the overall needs of not just the programs and the students, but the future of some of these programs. We are building for the future. So that's pretty much a estimated completion timeline and construction timeline for the projects. All right, last slide. Why now? And we've spoken about being able to maintain the debt load that's already out there, so it's not a shock to the tax levy out there. Again, the 34% state funding is huge. In all other mechanisms that we are able to take advantage of, this is the only one that is this lucrative for us. So it makes sense from a financial standpoint for us to take as much advantage of it as we can. A lot of these improvements are going to finance cost-effective solutions. In other words, the capital project will drive savings in our operational budget. Example of that would be a newer boiler system compared to, say, what we have at Central School. Central School has a steam plant from probably the 1950s at least. It is incredibly inefficient. Just the operation of that would, and the switch over to hot water, in addition to finishing the system over at that school, which are all question one calls, would save us tens of thousands of dollars a year in utilities cost. So those then get rolled back into the budget and get utilized in other areas that make sense. There is minimal tax impact. Again, going back to the first point, we talked about bundling projects together to get that economy of scale, to try to capture as much value as possible. And the referendum reduces the impact on the annual maintenance budget, allowing savings to be used for other projects, completion, roofing, windows, other code compliance things that come up. There's also, and I should mention this, when we look at other mechanisms for grants, when we look at, say, we want to do an energy efficiency project, if there are offsetting funds, we also have to be able to come up with the additional funds to complete the project up front. So it makes it tough when a lot of our operational costs are tied up in just putting out fires every day. It helps us then get ahead. So I want to remind everybody again, December 13th is the date that we're aiming for a vote. The language is in your packets to the board members, to everybody. There are two things posted today: a breakdown of our math. We want to show our work, but also for those that are, it might seem to be a lot. There is a slideshow that's on there that has a summarized itemization of what we're looking to replace or improve at each individual school. Is there anything anybody wants to add? I'm sorry, I kind of took over here.
No, that was great.
Okay. Any questions from the board before we go to Ms. Stites? I can
Thanks, Mr. Nasser.
turn here now.
So I know that you had mentioned that in the, when you were talking about the amounts of monies, that there's about a 15% buffer included in there. In the event a project were to not potentially cost what we're putting out there, what happens to those funds? Do those funds then get moved to other projects that are approved for the referendum? So what happens to that money in the event that we may not need it, although with the way inflation is running, I can only imagine?
Do you want to?
Sure. So that's a great question. So we provide some flexibility in the bond proposal question that allows budgetary funds to be moved between approved project at the referendum. And the reason for that is you haven't paid your architect to fully design these projects yet. Your architect has only done 10 to 20% schematics. So these are their best estimates. So some projects may come in lower and some projects may come in higher. So the bond question provides that flexibility within whatever's approved at the referendum. The important part for both the public and the board to realize is you're not allowed to spend $1 more total of the authorization than was authorized by the voters. So it's a upper limit on what can be spent, and any money that is not spent, once the projects are all complete, has to be returned to the voters via tax relief and has to be used to pay down the debt on the bonds. So there is some flexibility because of the way in New Jersey school projects are designed. We have to provide some flexibility because the projects will eventually be competitively bid. We don't have final design specs. So there is some flexibility to move money, but you can't spend more than the total authorized in the bond referendum.
And can you also expand, and when you refer to the flexibility, it's within those projects that are identified within the two questions, correct?
Correct. So whatever projects are approved, you're limited to whatever projects are approved at this referendum. You're not allowed to do any other projects with those monies, only the projects that are identified within the referendum and within those project approval letters that the state has issued.
So just, I understand that. I guess when you say you're not allowed to use, so what happens if you had a project, and you did everything's done except one last project. You still have $1 million in the bank to pay for this project that was budgeted at, $900,000, and for whatever reason, the price comes in at $1,050,000. $50,000 over what you have left over from the referendum money. Can you still do the project and use $50,000 of your own capital reserve or something out of your budget to make up the to make up the difference between what it would be in case, we do run short, which we're anticipating. I'm just trying to, you're talking about you're not allowed to use it. I'm just trying to understand the mechanics of, we can't do this project because we don't have enough money.
Sure.
Type of thing.
It's a good question. You're not allowed to spend $1 more than was authorized by the voters from any funds without getting a subsequent voter approval. So if you did have funds available in your capital reserve, you would have to put a statement in your budget at your annual election and through your annual budget process to use those funds. And hopefully that's why that 15% contingency is in there. And especially the projects that your architect's going to go out to bid early, they'll bid with alternatives, et cetera, to give them flexibility project by project so that they can come within, they can come within budget based on the projects that they described.
Could you explain to everybody, because sometimes a lot of these things people aren't familiar with, and it's easy to get lost in the weeds. So we've been talking about this for a long time. Could you explain what a bond is, for instance? Like most people don't realize school government is really the only form of government where elected board members can't just vote to borrow money and spend money. The municipal government, state government, fire districts, authorities, they all have the ability to go out and amongst, if there's 5 members on their boards, as long as they get a majority, they can go out and borrow money, where school districts can't do that. So could you talk a little bit maybe about that so people fully understand that basic premise, that school boards really don't have that much power when it comes to borrowing money? That's why it's got to go out to the voters?
We both can cover this one, but yes, but you're absolutely right. If the township, and the township does, every local municipality in New Jersey, if they're going to do some road improvements, going to do some things, they introduce an ordinance. It has a public hearing at a meeting. But it just gets passed by the governing body, 2/3 majority on the second vote. They can move forward with the project. School districts are different in that these projects cannot be done without the voter approval. And what the bond means is, so if the approval was given then for the questions, the district would, after the approval was received, the district would go out into the market and sell the bonds to the public. So we'd have, it'd be a competitive bid scenario, approved and qualified underwriting firms, broker-dealer firms, would place a bid based on very specific parameters. The regulations are very strict, which is a good thing in New Jersey for the way the bids have to be received. They're fixed rate bonds, so they're not, variable rate. They can't change, they could be refunded in the future, but they're fixed rate, so there's not, once the tax, once the bonds are sold, the debt service is known, is really my point there. So, and the bonds are then sold to the public. So the winning underwriter has the bonds, and then they're able to sell. A lot of times you have insurance companies, mutual funds, individual investors who then purchase these bonds from who the winning bidder would be, and then they would hold them through to maturity.
And just to add to that, basically what a bond is if you think about it, you or I as individuals, if we need money for a car or for a mortgage for a house, we can walk into a local bank and get a loan. As a public entity, a school district cannot do that. So their only opportunity to borrow large sums of money is through a voter-approved referendum. So they don't have the ability to go to your local bank and take out a loan, whereas you or I would as individuals. So this is a school district's opportunity to basically borrow money. And for a school district, it's actually a great deal because you or I don't get that 34% from the state, whereas school districts, you guys will get, and the only way you'll get that 34% is if you have a voter-approved referendum. Whereas if you did all these same projects on your own, you have to fund 100% of the cost. Whereas through this voter-approved referendum, the state is going to chip in 34% of both principal and interest.
So just to be clear, if Wall Township Committee next week decided they wanted to borrow $53 million, they would need 4 out of the 5 people on their committee to vote in favor of it, and they would be able to go out for $53 million without a vote of the Wall Township taxpayers to fund roads or whatever it might be, building improvements, maybe even things that we're looking to do. That's correct?
Yes, as long as the ordinance was approved.
Okay, thank you.
One question about the 15% contingency. Has that been the number for many years? Or, I mean, you know, we've seen the highest inflation rates in 30, 40 years. Has that number crept up in the last, little bit, or has that just been the standard?
I think it varies architect by architect. I've seen as low. I don't think the state of New Jersey will approve a project unless you have at least 10% contingency. And I think they will accept up to 25% contingency. But usually, and I can't speak for your architect, they'll be here on the 15th, but usually they also include, besides the contingency, they include escalation in there as well when they model out the project. So besides the contingency, there's usually some escalation factors in there as well. Because as you saw from Mr. Nasser's slide, it's going to be built out over a couple summers. So besides the contingency, there's usually some escalation factors in there. But I think that's a good question to ask them and why they're comfortable. And you guys have a really qualified, good school architect that does a ton of projects and delivers. So, I'm sure whatever numbers they used, they're comfortable with that they can deliver those projects.
Let me add some context to that, because I was actually in a seminar last week and spoke with a different architect and a contractor that I've worked with in the past to do a large capital project, just to get their viewpoint. And the one statistic that came up was that since 2017 till now, the escalation has been 30%. So it's been, in 5 years, a third increase in the amount of construction costs that are out there. Some of that was due to COVID, supply chain challenges. Some of it was due to certain tariffs that went in place across North America. Some of it, it just had to do with labor contracts being renegotiated. So there's been a significant increase on top of the inflation that we've seen. So I know when I've done projects, referendum in the past, we've budgeted up to 20% in some cases. In this case, with what we're looking at, and again, we can talk to our architect next 2 weeks about that 15% in particular, but I agree. It's again, we're trying to hit a moving target, and it's, I think, on everybody's agenda right now, and it's a concern for us all.
Ms. Tracy, do you have more questions?
No, I mean, I was just, that's, my point wasn't that it should be lower. My point is, the concern is 15 enough, especially with, projects that we have. I mean, Joe, we've talked about this a couple times, right? Like when we pay people to do stuff in the school, it's not like you're just hiring a contractor at your house who's going to do stuff like, where you can get major discounts.
Well, I do want to add that some of that will be addressed in the design phase, as Mr. Solomini pointed out before. The design phase that we are at this point in time is a general scope. It's enough to set a budget. We haven't done the exact cost estimating to know it's going to take 34 feet of pipe to get from room A to room B. That is something that gets sharpened in the next phase because it's expensive. And that soft cost then gets rolled into the project costs, which then the state helps to finance. So some of that will be addressed. We're looking at the current reality for any equipment that we may need. Again, lead times are a big problem right now. We'll look at the cost factors for whatever materials that are needed and then design within that budget. But as an overall goal, this would be our starting point, and then we have to design within those boundaries. Of
And I think you
course,
should note that the F&F committee asked the architects to go back, review their preliminary estimates that were provided when they did the feasibility condition assessment, and had them re-cost out the projects that were included in this project. And that was done prior to them submitting to the Department of Education.
and I would like to say I would be overjoyed if the costs come in lower. That is the goal, but for something like this, we have to be a little bit more conservative in how we're estimating. So, it's a point is well taken.
And if I could ask Ms. Tracy to comment on, once the bonds are sold, what happens? Is that all that happens for the next 25 years? Or how is that debt managed over the life? And if you can speak to some of the things that were done with the last bond referendum in Wall Township.
Yes, absolutely. So after the referendum would pass, we would go out to sell the bonds. They could be, likely they would be sold in one piece as one bond issue. There's certain times, certain market conditions where it might be favorable to not sell all of them at the moment. But likely they would be sold all as one. At that point, the debt service is then locked in. We would know what the interest rate is. As I mentioned before, they are competitively bid, so we would know what the interest rate is. The bonds would have a call option, so they would be able to be refunded in the future. The last series, the 98 series, that is being paid off next budget year, that this issue would replace, was refunded a couple of times and saved the district millions, literally millions, in debt service as the board and the administration, to get together with us, monitored those interest rates, monitored conditions in the market, and then took advantage of refinancing those. One key component as well was the same in the prior issue and maintains the same as this issue. Unlike when you would refinance your mortgage, you may go out, you may have your house, and 10 years in, you refinance it for 30 years, and you go out another 30 years, and but at the time, you had 20 years left on your mortgage. That doesn't happen with school bonds. So this issue is financed over 25 years. Even if we refinance 10 years from now, we would finance the original final maturity would still be the final maturity. So then it'd be 15 years at that point. There's never an extension of maturity. And that was the same again with the issue that was refunded in 15 and then in 08, 09, several times. Again, every time the final maturity remained the final maturity.
And let me chime in too, because as we were doing the assessment and categorizing the projects into question 1, question 2, or even to include them at all, one of the factors that we look at is the lifespan of the actual project so that it aligns with the length of the debt service cycle. So if I'm looking at replacing a roof that the warranty is expired on, we would get a 25-year warranty so that by the time that roof reaches end of life, we are ready for then another debt cycle to kick in. So some of this is long-term planning, some of it is looking at and trying to manage the life cycle management of the individual equipment and components. Obviously, I don't think we're going to be knocking down and rebuilding schools. It's extremely expensive, so we have to do everything that we can to maintain the existing infrastructure that we have.
Anything else? No? Okay. Seeing none, we will open up for public comment on the special presentation. Please come up to the microphone and give your name for the record. And all the questions, please come to me and then we'll direct them out.
Hello, Denise Cabezas, Wall Township. My first question is, do you know how much it costs to have a special election?
Do you have a couple questions?
3.
Okay, yeah, go.
Okay, so the first one is just how much it costs to run a special election. The second is, can question 1, the bond proposal question 1, pass without bond proposal question 2?
Yes.
So I heard it the one way. And have we already paid out any monies to the architect? And if so, how, if the referendum wasn't already passed? So where did that money come from?
Okay. All right. The answer to number 2 is very simple. Yes, question 1 can pass without question number 2, but question 1 has to pass for question number 2 to pass.
Okay.
And then the total funding we'll receive from the state is about $20 million between both.
Okay.
How much for the special election? Mr. Smythe, do you know that number?
No, we have not been provided that estimate as of yet.
Any idea ballpark? No?
No.
No? Okay. How does that process work with what they charge? Do you know how they charge or, what their process is? They don't have a set fee just for a special election?
Mr.
Aye.
Arnizio,
Yes.
point of clarification, who's they?
The county, I'm sorry, the Board of Elections.
Well, I think
What are
it's
you?
the municipality, because it'll be the cost of the poll workers, if there's any facilities that are rented, and then the fee that would be processed by the county. But we've inquired for the township, and they're in the process of calculating that. Part of that's dependent on this question being approved, because one of the items within the question is the time that the polls will be open.
Okay.
Could I follow up with why that wasn't added to the November 8th election and why it has to be a special to cost, that weren't cost?
Because we didn't get everything back from the state. So when we submitted, just so you know, and we talked about it once before, I have actually all the dates here. So on May 31st, our architect submitted 10 projects. On June 14th, they submitted 3. June 23rd, they submitted 2, and then on June 24th, they submitted 3. The 3 later ones that were submitted required more information and more detail. That's why the initial 10 were quick to get in. Typically, the state can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days. They ran much, much longer than the 90 days. So we kind of thought they were running late, so we kind of, in our minds, had December picked. If things came back sooner, we would have been able to do it sooner.
Okay.
But up until, really a couple weeks ago, we weren't even sure if we were going to get all the projects back because we were waiting for a couple. And then actually after our last board meeting, I think it was the day after the last project came in.
Okay.
I'm sorry, your question number 3 again was?
Yeah, it was just about the architects. So
Oh.
we are already paying
Yeah, go
out
ahead.
architects even though we haven't passed the referendum?
I can answer that, and this is part of the reason why we don't have full designs. We do a limited design, so that keeps our costs down initially. We pay for that out of our current budget. If the referendum
Mm-hmm.
passes, we're then able to reimburse ourselves from those
And
bond
that's allowed?
proceeds. Yes, and that will make us whole again within
Yeah.
our current operational budget. It gets rolled into the bond issuance.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And just so you know, too, we have to do some of that work on the front end to submit to the state. So it's just not like we can say, give stuff to the state and say, here, we have to do that.
Okay.
So, thank you. Is there anybody else?
Robin Cervantes, I live in Wall. I just have a couple questions. With regard to the 15% contingency and that buffer that you were talking about, and then there were some follow-up questions from the board about how that could be spent if you didn't go to the project limits. And Mr. Smythe followed up with something on it, and I just wasn't 100% clear. If question 1 is approved, but question 2 isn't, can funds from question 1 that aren't utilized be used for anything in question two?
No,
That can't, that.
no, can't. You guys are shaking, would you like the answer?
Sure. Yeah, you can only use funds for what's approved by the voters. So if question two gets denied by the voters, even if there's leftover proceeds in the first question, it can't be used for any of those projects in question two.
Okay, and then you said then the projects that are in question one, and let's say you have $3 million left over, you said that has to go back to tax relief.
Yeah, so what would happen is, using your example, the projects are all done, the projects are complete, and you have $3 million left over. The board has to take that amount of money and each year use it to pay back principal on the bonds. So if in next year's budget, just for argument's sake, there's a $1 million bond payment, the board would have to take $1 million of the $3 million that was left over, pay the principal on that bond, save the $2 million for the next year's principal payment. Whatever then was used for that principal, so it has to go back to debt relief.
So whatever that leftover is could be in an interest-bearing account that gets invested and then so that it can earn money as well. Okay, that clears that one up for me. The only other thing, and it's an aside because it really, I was surprised that there wasn't anything related to capacity increases in the district with regard to the size of this referendum, specific to Central School and the amount of building that's going on up there. I think, as I calculated, I did request the most recent demographic study, and it does show, I mean, it's not completely updated because the projects weren't in construction during the time that they were doing the study. But it's pretty clear that there's about 700 units that are coming by 2025. And those units are going to be filled with kids because most times when people buy a new place, they come prepared to have kids and put them in the district. So I guess my question, since we are 4 classrooms down at Central, what's the plan? Because it's not addressed in this referendum. And I know that when you discussed that they had identified, I think the number was $231 million worth of projects that were in the district, that you pared down to this $53 million question one. Was one of those things that were in the other section, was that a school? Like, no, there were, out of all that, nothing was said that we're going to need another school anytime in the next 10 years?
No. You want me to take
Yeah,
this?
go ahead.
Okay, so as we were going through, and we spent about the last 18 months really trying to wrap our heads around the impact of the building and how we utilize our buildings. So there's a number referred to as our functional capacity that when we examine our buildings allow us to understand whether or not a building is being underutilized or overutilized. There is capacity, and we do have spare capacity within our buildings. As I'm sure everybody will recall, our enrollment has decreased significantly. However, in specific areas, that enrollment has increased. In that case, in order to solve what may be overcrowding in one building and underutilization in another building, you have to redistrict. And that is something that we need to examine as a board to make sure that we're using all the space that we have efficiently.
Yeah, that was I know that there are other ways to address overcrowding in schools. I mean, my kids were at Central when we were over 600 and I think it was 640 we hit, and it was a terrible time. And that's when we had to resort to the trailers to try to alleviate some of that. And it was appreciated because, it was necessary. Redistricting has always been one of those things in this town that has people freak out. And I just want to make sure that the board and the superintendent and the administration realize that though there are 3 out of the 4 are under construction right now. I mean, they're almost done. There's one that isn't. That's a big one. That's Matt Calley, but that is approved, and I assume that will start building soon. So it's definitely going to happen, and I think that you all need to keep it in mind that, I mean, either you're going to spot rezone or one development's going to go to a school that has capacity, and, but hopefully it's not just that the class sizes are going to keep getting bigger and bigger at Central like they always used to, because it just isn't fair. It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be planned for, and I hope to hear more about that. Thank you.
I would just like to add that that was getting a very accurate as possible read on future enrollments. That was one of the reasons we asked for the most recent demographer study, because we wanted to, because of the developing in town, and we have been communicating with town officials, and you know that we will certainly be discussing
They
this.
should revise that for you, just simply, I mean, knowing that most towns are dealing with this now, where the actual building happens, and it has to happen by 2025, because that is the arrangement most towns have to deal with because of the affordable housing settlements.
So it's very much in the forefront of our
Yeah.
minds.
Well, very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Betsy Cross, I live in Wall. I know I brought this up the last couple meetings, that we didn't have the cost of what it was going to be to have a separate election. And that's really important. I mean, that just shows that we're not addressing things we need to address. Like, why would we now not wait until, I see you put the clock on for me, but nobody
Excuse
else,
me.
Ralph.
Point of clarification.
Yes,
This question was asked and answered?
yes.
Okay.
Right. My whole point is, you should now wait till next November until you know what the cost is.
Okay, Ms.
So
Cross,
you
we
cannot
are- we are
ask,
not doing that.
you cannot ask people to approve a referendum. What if it's $500,000? You have to know what the cost is before you go out and ask people for money. That's poor business planning by Mr. Smythe.
Okay, Ms. Cross,
And the
that's not
president.
Mr. Smite's fault.
It's somebody's fault, because Cherry Hill had cost an extra $130,000. So it's probably going to cost around 75 at least here.
Well, we're not
That's a
going to make up,
question.
we're not going to
Don't
make up
talk on
numbers
my
tonight.
time.
We're not going
Please
to
be
make up
quiet.
numbers tonight. We're going to state
Yeah.
facts, and we
So
don't
put
know
it on
yet.
hold until you actually know the numbers. Couple other questions I had. I just can't understand, you know, you have people putting up pictures of roofs leaking. If roofs are leaking, you need to fix them. You can't wait for a referendum, just like the trailers. If the trailers are falling apart and they're moldy, you can't wait for the referendum, which is what you were trying to do. You can't keep children and staff in unsafe conditions and wait for a referendum. That's what you can't do. Could you answer, how many private Zoom calls have you had with PTO parents only that Mr. Smythe was on? I'd like you to answer that question. Can the bond people answer this? Is staff allowed to text kids and say, hey,
Ms.
talk
Cross,
to your
please
parents?
direct your questions here.
Okay, directing it to you to ask her. Are students allowed to receive emails saying, talk to your parents, we need to get the referendum through? I'd like you to answer that question. I'd also like to have you answer, how many other schools have you done referendums for in the last year? I don't know why. I did ask this question, what is the warranty on the roofs? We just put in new roofs at the high school, Central, Allenwood, and West Belmore in 11-12. What is the warranty on those roofs before we start buying new roofs for the same schools? I did ask that question, I put it in writing, and I got nothing back. And roofs should be, and boilers should be over air conditioning. I know, go over how much you spent on air conditioning. I know we had a big problem with the bids. We got sued by that, by...
That's not part of this evening.
Yeah, I'd like to know how much you've spent on air conditioning and how much you're gonna spend on air conditioning in the new budget. I can't quite understand how you're saying that the debt that's coming off is going to be a flat increase. If we only borrowed 39 million before, and the financial assumption I have here from the last referendum was 5.1%. So the total repayment was 72 million. What is the borrowing rate that you're assuming for this? Because at the last meeting, Mr. Smythe said 4.5% at 30 years. How are you coming up with, if we're borrowing 39 million, what's the assumption rate for the interest that we're paying? Like, we can't approve a bond, 66 million, and then come up with what the rate's gonna be. We have to know all that ahead of time. Because I just did a quick mortgage calculator, 30 years, we'd be paying 120 million for 66.6. We have to know all this. And if we don't know it, you have to table it and do it next November when there's no extra cost. This is real money. This isn't monopoly money. And the average homeowner would save $490 if question 1 and 2 doesn't pass. Those were the numbers that you gave, but you didn't have it online. You only had it here. So if the average person's going to save $245 and most people, their house is worth double, they're going to save $490 by saying no. You're leaving that out, and that's very important. And I hope the newspapers put it in there because you're hiding it. You're hiding what it's going to cost, and you're hiding other items. You have no breakout here of question 1 and question 1 DSA. I'd like the answer of what the breakout is. Robin Cervantes had a lot of great points up on Facebook going over capital improvements, all the money you have in the bank already, and you're not spending it. So everybody should go back and look at those posts. And you, Adam Nasser, you're on Facebook. Go back and look at them and answer the questions. Because that's where people are wondering what's going on. What's going on? We can't approve $150 million now without knowing the rate, without knowing the term. It's crazy. And we were told the architect was going to be here. Why isn't he here? You said, come on November 1st. The architect's going to be here to answer questions. Well, guess what? He's not here. It's time to...
He's right
Oh,
there.
he just got here now?
Oh, he's been here for a little while.
You just said the architect is coming at the next meeting. How are we supposed to know that's him? You didn't introduce him. He snuck in and sat down. I don't know who this guy is.
Time
How does
is up.
anybody else?
All right, Ms. Cross, your time is up. Thank you.
So are we able to ask the architect questions?
You've asked a
You
bunch of
just had
questions right
5
now.
minutes.
So, big deal, there was 5 minutes. You're talking, you want $150 million, and
No,
people
that's
only
not-
get $5 million?
That's not what we're asking for.
Okay, so
Let's
go
talk
over,
about
have the
facts.
bond person, that's why she's here
right.
tonight, is to answer the questions.
Your time is up, Ms. Cross.
The-
Thank you.
Please go over the financial assumptions you're
Thank you.
making.
So every year, let's start with this, Mr. Smythe. Every year, how much do we budget in our annual school budget for improvements? You know, things that we try to fix and do. Do you,
Well, we have a regular maintenance budget that, hundreds of thousands of dollars. A regular maintenance budget that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. We break it down by each building. We report on each building, but as stated at the last meeting, on the capital improvements to make repairs and replace equipment in the schools. We've done HVAC improvements at a number of schools over the past few years, and we spent more than $10 million over the last 5 years doing those capital improvements in all the district facilities.
okay. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right, because thank you. There's a couple of points to build off of what Mr. Smythe is saying. We budget for repairs. We don't budget for replacements. At a certain point, a roof, for instance, that is leaking is going to need to be replaced. Not only is the roof membrane or the roof shingle replaced, but if there's any insulation under it, it's a more comprehensive project. That is a maintenance item. When it comes to a capital item, when we look at a complete replacement, that's what we're talking about. I do want to say that the roofs because roofs are so expensive, in general, if we're paying for it out of our capital budget, we'll keep it contained to an area of the building. So none of the projects for roofing that are included within this were from that 11-12 time frame. These are other areas of the roofs, maybe the same building, but are still in need of replacement.
Please stop yelling out.
Normally they're 20 to 25 years. I don't have that information immediately available to me. Another thing I want to say, the 1 versus the 1 DSA. So the column 1 question is the full cost. The DSA stands for debt service aid. So when you're looking at that column, that is the debt service aid we're getting for question 1. So that's the state funding that we are getting. For any questions, and I mean, we do have a email address set up on the website. There's a FAQ section that I encourage people to go take a look at. But there is an email address, vision@wallpublicschools.org. Did I get that right? that people can send questions to specific to the referendum to try to get answers on and have included within that FAQ. Chances are, if you're asking it, there's other people that are asking it, so it's good for us to get an ongoing list of what those FAQs are. I can say, me personally, I'd love to hop on Facebook and answer some of these questions, but I am not allowed to do that anymore, and we've already been through that. Ms. Cross knows the history. And referring to this as monopoly money, I actually, I don't look at that as a bad thing, because the core tenet of monopoly is two things. It's cash management, and it's when to use leverage to your advantage and do the right thing for trying to win the game. So to refer to this as monopoly money, I don't look as a negative, because the core of learning how to manage money is within that game. So, you know, monopoly money, it's cash. At the end of the day, we're here to try to figure out the most cost-effective way to get these projects done. This is what we've come up with. Again, this is why we're out here talking about it, and we want to answer questions about it.
And Mr. Nasser, do you want to also speak to the requirements school districts have with regard to investing in their facilities in order to qualify for debt service aid?
Oh, you know what, that's a good point, because I was thinking about that on my way in. So industry standard for investing in capital projects, our best practice is 4% of assessed value. If, you know, we have 6 schools, roughly 200, I think we're just over 200 acres of land. I'm gonna guess that our assessed value is somewhere in the range of $150 million, contents and property. 4% of that is, if my math is correct, somewhere shy of about $7 million a year. If we were to invest $7 million a year out of our capital budget, there would be extreme cuts to our operational budget. So we do have to be conscious of the fact that, you know, even as across the state, and our professionals who work across the state and deal with this on a daily basis, you know, we're not that far outside of the normal operating procedures of any other district when it comes to this. So, we do, if, was it our M1 has our maintenance costs on a year-to-year basis on it?
Yeah, the comprehensive maintenance plan?
Yeah, it's part of our comprehensive maintenance plan. These are state-required documents that get turned into the state every year. They're on our agenda, I believe. I think it was just recently on our agenda.
October.
Yeah, so I would go back into the agenda in the minutes for specific information on that.
So, in regards to the monopoly money, that was very, very good. But, you know, just so everybody understands why, for a school district, a referendum is so important. And this, Dr. Handerhan gave a presentation at our last meeting, so I'm going to read from her presentation because it spells it out very clearly. And if you think about it, it's a no-brainer. So this past summer, air conditioning was installed in the South Gym of Wall High School, the gym right across the hall here where all the students, almost all the students eat lunch on a daily basis. The project was funded through our annual school budget of $621,000. So what we did was we carved out a chunk of our school budget for $621,000 to do that. So if that particular project was part of a referendum, let's say this referendum, we would have received $211,140 in state aid. So the actual cost would have only been $409,860. But because we didn't have a referendum scheduled and it couldn't wait, we had to fund it through the school budget, so we lost out on $211,140. That's why doing a referendum and borrowing the money is so important, because it allows us to do these things and save the taxpayers' money. Because these are not things, this isn't like a wish list for Christmas. These are things that absolutely need to get done. You know, we have. It was just in a health and safety meeting about 2 weeks ago, where there was a classroom that had 25 buckets set up catching water all over the classroom. I mean, that's unacceptable. And you can't say that we don't spend money on the schools, because we spend a ton of money every year, but the money only goes so far. So again, $621,000 the district spent, If it was part of a referendum, we would have had a $211,140 state-funded part of that, and we would only have paid $409,860. That's why this is so important. Could you guys explain how we come up with no tax increase for question number 1?
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, did you want your questions answered? Because you're talking and I'm distracted. Okay. Okay, great.
And before the professionals do
Yes.
chime in, I just want to clarify, because you said I stated the interest rate was 4.5 at 30 years, or the bond sales, it was actually 25 years is what was provided. Also to clarify what the cost of the current debt is for the average assessed home, it's
Yes.
at $185 for the average assessed home on an annual basis, not,
Please stop yelling out.
Stop yelling out, Ms. Cross.
so whatever figures were doubled were incorrect, so I just wanted to
Can you
clarify
please stop
that.
yelling out, Ms. Cross? Ms. Cross, there are other people here that are watching and they're interested in what's going on. Please stop yelling out. Yes.
Yes, so the tax impact numbers that we're talking about tonight for the 53 million that makes this a tax neutral scenario is based on 25 years. 30 years was a scenario we did look at for 4.5. This analysis we're talking about tonight for question 1 is based on 25 years at a rate of 4.3%,
Please stop yelling out.
which is very conservative in today's market.
Ms. Cross, this is your last warning. Please stop yelling out. This is a business meeting.
So the information, all the information contained in the analyses are based on conservative estimates of true interest rates in the market, of other sales that are happening. The New Jersey municipal bond market is something we are in every single day and evaluating every single day, tracking bond issues that happen all across the state. So these, again, are conservative estimates. I know there was a comparison made to the last referendum. I think one of the biggest differences, which is not really apples to apples, in that the state changed the formula for debt service aid in 2000. So the prior referendum was not eligible for the same type of debt service aid. I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the debt service aid component is huge because it does allow the state to pay for more than 1/3 of the total costs, principal and interest. So in the question 1 scenario of 53 million, that's almost $30 million of what the state would chip in for debt service. So when we look at numbers for that, the interest rate, cannot be known until we sell the bonds. There's no mechanism to lock in an interest rate prior to an approved referendum or an actual sale of the bonds. They're competitively bid after the referendum's approved. The sale is properly advertised for, and all the specifications are available. So any of the estimates are based on, again, current market rates with conservative projections. Total debt service, 53 million. Interest cost, roughly 34, which brings you a net of about 87. Again, reduced by $29.7 million of debt service aid, leaves you with about $57 million over the course of the 25 years. So the total net, everything, principal, interest, debt service aid, would be about 57 million is the cost of that, to borrow that 53. Interest rates are lower than when the prior referendum was sold, over 20 years ago. And we did talk about as well, that referendum was then refinanced several times, which did reduce the taxpayers, the tax burden, by millions of dollars, in these last 20 years. This referendum would have the same option of callability to be able to refinance in the future should rates drop below whatever the final interest rate would be. I'm just looking to see if there's anything else. I think the question was also asked about how many referendums, we've done. Our firm is roughly involved in, I would say, between 25 to 30 referendums across the state every year. We were involved in 6 of the referendums, the special elections that just happened in October. and, very, very in touch with the municipal market, very comfortable with the interest rates, and debt service aid and all of the different projections included here.
Ralph?
Yes, Mr. Hall.
Yeah. Does the ratables from then till now have a impact that as well? Because I'm thinking, as a math person, I'm thinking even if Mrs. Cross, convoluted math is right, if you borrowed $50 million, back 20 years ago, and at a rate of 4.5%, yes, you have to pay this amount of money back. But if it was only spread out over this many taxpayers, then the taxpayers are going to pay X amount. If 20 years later you borrow the same 50 million at the same 4.5%, yes, the numbers of what you pay back would be the same. But if it was spread out over more taxpayers in the town, the taxpayers themselves would see less of a increase. And I think, sometimes people understand, think that, they're looking at 20 years ago versus now. How can that be? And it's like some of these nuanced things just kind of go over some people's heads. So I just want to make sure that I'm thinking about that correctly, that if my scenario, my example was correct, you could borrow the same amount of money now, and then 20 years from now, for the same rate, for the same period. Yes, the exact amount of money that you'd be paying back is the same. The math's the math. But how it would impact an individual taxpayer would be greatly different.
So before Sherry gives you a real intelligent math answer, I'm a word guy, not a math guy. So I'm going to try to explain it for those non-math people out there. When Sherry made a very important point that the funding changed, historically, if you had a $10 million project, right, the state would give you an upfront grant of, in this example, $3.4 million. So historically, when you did your prior bond sale, to get $10 million worth of projects, you would have only had to borrow $6.6 million. But that would have got you $10 million worth of projects. Now, to get that same $10 million, you have to borrow that $10 million, and the state gives you that $3.4 million over the life of the bonds. So you get to the same place, you're just getting to it differently. So historically, you might have borrowed that $39 million or whatever because you had upfront, that debt service aid came in the form of an upfront grant, which was actually probably a larger project. So that's why that project now gives you a much larger project, because you got the aid probably historically upfront, where now you're getting it over the life of the issue.
Yes.
I think maybe you can answer this. So the state aid that we keep talking about, the money from the state, are we paying some of that? Like, do our taxes go towards this? So our taxes already go to this state aid, and then this state aid can come back to Wall through this referendum.
Yeah, it's a great point. When the state develops its budget every year, it looks at the amount of money that has been promised to districts for bond issues that are outstanding and approved and issued. So they look at all of the bond issues sold, and they look at the eligible cost letters that Wall has now received, the ones we referenced that we were waiting on in order to be able to do the question and to move forward with the election. They look at that. Those are committed dollars, and so once the bonds are sold, they raise that money in their budget. So yes, absolutely, every taxpayer in New Jersey is paying that money, is paying into that fund, which is going to all the school districts in New Jersey with approved referendums that have been promised debt service aid. So that it's a great point. We're paying other districts via our state taxes, other districts' referendum projects on what the percentage of aid they've received. This allows some of that to come back to Wall.
And for questions 1 and 2, it would allow $20 million to come back to Wall.
Plus the interest on that. So the 20 million is just the principal, but interest also on that. So it's about 32 million or so. Again, depending what the final interest rate would be. But over the life, roughly about 32 million because it's principal and interest.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And just to touch on the point about the rateable base, you're 100% correct. That's a great way to think about it. One other note I'll make too with the tax impact is I did leave the rateable base completely flat for the next 25 years. So that adds another mechanism of a conservative estimate, I'll say, in the annual tax impact. Last year, the assessed value grew by about 90 million. So that's that's a big growth. You know, we probably won't see 90 million every year, just like everywhere. We'll go through cycles. We'll see, growth, sometimes 50, 90, you might see 100, might see a couple years of flat or even a decrease, but I did leave everything flat. Based on where the township was 24, 25 years ago, that's absolutely a great point, because the rateable base was much smaller. So when you have to issue $39 million, it's spread over a smaller base. And so you pay more. Each individual taxpayer pays more now that the ratables have continued to grow. And if they continue to grow in the future, as I'm sure they will over the 25 years, maybe not every year, but they will grow over the 25 years, the amount you're spreading over there is reduced, and so the impact to the individual taxpayer is less.
Thank you. Dr. Hinder?
Yes, I would just like to follow up with the last discussion and really stress the fact that taxes are based on assessed value, not market value. And there's a big difference between market values, meaning when you type an address into Zillow, you'll get their stab at market value. Your assessed value is what, where I live, I get the little postcard that comes out, my assessed value from the municipality. That's the assessed value, and that's where the ratables are. So I just want to really drive that point home, that it's based on the assessed value and not the market value. Another item I'd like to address is the suggestion or declaration that staff is texting students. I would like to reiterate that it is, with the exception of family members, it is against the law and certainly against policy for staff to text students. So if I just want to make that clear, that if, and I feel I have to follow this up, if there's any, if someone has knowledge of that they need to reach out to administration, because it is very clear that outside of family, for example, that staff can't text students. So I just want to drive that home, and certainly I'm unaware of any kind of electioneering on the behalf of staff members. We encourage individuals to vote. We do not encourage individuals on how to vote. So it is our duty to educate what the referendum is speaking to. It is our duty to educate, and it is our need is to not only educate, but it's also to make people aware that the vote is scheduled for December 13th. So with that, I just want to drive that home, that our job is to educate and make voters aware of what they are being asked to vote upon. So I just wanted to stress that as well. Thank you, Mr. Adams.
Thank you.
Please stop calling out. Please stop calling out.
Can I start?
Yes. Good
Okay.
evening.
Sarah Venezia, Ramshorn Drive, Wall, New Jersey. Just have a few questions. Tracy, right? Tracy? Sure. Okay. And you said that you had done a couple of referendums in New Jersey. Could you just tell me what the rate of the Cherry Hill referendum was? It kind of gives us an idea.
Could you just direct your questions to me? We'll get them all, and then we'll have them answered.
Okay. Also, what is the fee to apply for a referendum? And what is the total repayment for question 1 and question 2?
Okay. Do you, so, is that all your questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I am working with Cherry Hill on their referendum. They just passed the referendum. The vote was October 6th.
Right.
They are planning for a sale. They have not sold the bonds yet. It does take, roughly 6 to 8 weeks. The election proceedings have to be certified by the county, so it does take a little time. They have not sold yet. Their bonds, they are looking at a 20-year scenario, so it would be a little bit shorter. I can tell you another district.
And we're doing a 30-year?
25.
25 year,
25 is
okay.
what's anticipated. The referendum vote actually doesn't specify the number of years for the repayment, but the 25 is what the tax impact is based on. It's what the board has discussed and has decided upon for purposes of informational purposes. That could certainly change. If rates drop and there's a decision before the sale that we could actually finance this in 23 years with a flat, neutral tax impact, that might be something the board elects to do. I certainly don't speak for the board. I just wanted to make that part clear. The analysis is based on a 25-year scenario. So we did recently sell bonds for a district about 2 weeks ago, a referendum that had passed earlier this year, and that rate was a 3.98. So if that's helpful, just to give you the most recent context, that was the most recent school district. I think we will start to see some other sales leading up into December from those October 6 referendums. There were 10 successful of the 11. The last I heard, the 11th was a tie. I don't know if they were still sorting through a few things there. I'm not sure what the final result was on that one, but 10 of the 11 that went forth did pass. So I do think we'll start to see some results, and I will absolutely be keeping the district up to date on what those are, and of course be monitoring those.
Okay, all right.
And then I think the question about the total debt I had given you before, net the state aid for question 1 is about 57 million. Question 2, as it receives a little bit less state aid, net would be about 19 million total. So that would be principal and interest less the debt service aid component. So roughly between the two, the 57 and 19, roughly about 76 million.
Please stop yelling out.
That's everything.
That's
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, the key component here, really, I keep saying it, but it's really the state aid component. I mean, the fact that a third of this is being paid by the state, which was not the case in the prior referendum. So, it's something that is only available when you do issue bonds. We talked about it before. Projects done through the capital budget are not eligible for this aid. This money is being raised in all of our taxes to pay for other referendums, such as the Cherry Hill referendum and other referendums that have passed. So it is available, but only with a past referendum.
Okay, and the fee did you answer the fee to apply for the referendum?
Oh, I'm not sure exactly I don't know if I'm the best one to answer that. The fee to apply, I guess there's the special election costs, which I know are being requested and still worked through.
Ralph, will we get that number? Or?
So Mr. Smite, he did answer that a few minutes ago.
Okay.
It's submitted to the town. The town is, I guess it's a two-part probably. The town has to come up with numbers as well as the county?
I'm not sure if the question has to do with the submission for the referendum to the Department of Education, or
I'm
there's
sorry.
no fee for the submission.
To the Department of Ed,
okay.
yeah.
So there is no fee for that. I'm
There's
sorry. I
no
thought you were
fee.
talking about
We have the
Yeah.
architect here who handled the submission, so I defer to
Okay.
Mr. Kozik, Justin Kozik from the architectural firm. Speaking.
Quick, I only have 34 seconds.
So to answer your question, any of the projects that required educational adequacy review will require a fee at the time of final submission. In these cases, in a referendum, there is a schematic submission that gets approved by the state, which is where they derive their PEC letters, FEC letters from. So
I'm sorry, could you just explain what that means? I mean, the
Sure.
acronyms you go nuts with.
So, sure, absolutely. So, to submit a project to the state for a referendum, we have to put together a submission package, which includes drawings, applications, board resolutions, a scope of work letter, in the case of educational projects, basically anything that involves modifying the interior of a classroom or an addition. Those require what's called educational specifications, and in the initial phase, when you're going out for a referendum, there is no fee for the Department of Education to review those projects. If the referendum does pass and we move forward with those projects, there will be another submission that needs to occur to the Department of Education to verify the projects and the educational specifications and the final design matches what the original submission was. At that time, the district will be paying a review fee for those projects. And those funds would come out of the referendum costs. Like we mentioned before, I believe we talked about that there was 15% soft costs, 15% contingencies built into this project. Those fees are included in that 15% soft costs that were developed as part of this budget.
Okay. Okay, do you have like an approximation of what they would total to?
I don't have that number offhand handy, but we can very easily get that number.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Herbert, you're next.
Good evening, Gail Marr, 1440 Marconi Road. I had a question and a statement, but Dr. Handerhan answered my question about the house evaluations. So I was going to come up and say, who comes up with a $483,000 average in Wall Township? So thank you. When I think of the $53 million, and I think at maximum, maybe we pay in capital projects, say $3 million a year, it would take 17 and a half years to do the projects that we need to do now. My granddaughter is 3 years old, which means she will have graduated from Wall High School and all of the projects will not still have been done. We do have lots of leaks. We do have items that have to be taken care of. Pushing things out to the summer of 2023 is a problem with those things. We have to have a budget referendum that passes. Thank you.
Thank you. And what we're looking at is approximately $2 million a year, which would take a little over 26 years to fund through the annual school budget. And that's assuming nothing else goes wrong and we could just dedicate all that money towards the list of projects we have, which we all know is a joke. It would never happen. Mr. Herbert, I'm sorry.
Don Herbert, November the 15th, we can ask questions to the architect. Direct questions.
Well, if you have some questions tonight, please.
No, I have a list.
Oh. Well, if you...
right now, I'm a no vote. Okay. He's got to sell me this project with my question, with his answers.
Okay. Mr. Herbert, if you want to submit those, I mean, so he could have them, or you just want to do it on the fly?
He ought to have the answers.
Okay.
If it's in his proposal, he ought to have the answers.
Okay. That's fine. Absolutely. Thank you. He is here this evening, and he is willing to answer questions. All right, please stop.
Please stop calling out. It's very disruptive.
Good evening.
Good evening, Ann O'Connor, Wall Township. My understanding of question one is about 34% will be paid by the state. The other balance comes from what has been called debt reserves or debt loads from previous referendums. If question one doesn't pass, what happens to those? Will they be refunded now to the taxpayer?
Well, so what we were talking about, right now, there's debt on our books from previous referendums. And the reason why we're going for a referendum now is that debt's going to, they call it retire, meaning it's going to be paid off. So we're looking to replace that debt, which works out to be $185 for the average assessed home, with new debt so we can do the improvements we do. If a referendum did not pass, then there'd just be $185 off your annual
It would go
taxes.
back to the taxpayers.
Well, it wouldn't go back anywhere. It would just come off. It's not like there's a tax, you're getting money back. It's just you're not paying it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else?
Hi, Ellie Rezick, Wall Township. I just have a quick question. I'm wondering how we plan on educating taxpayers and voters about the special election and the details of the referendum outside of, people outside of the district.
The regular homeowners.
Sure, I'll definitely start. There will be a mailing sent to probably a postcard. We're working on designing that now. There have been several, and certainly will be in the near future, many community outreaches trying to educate the public. And certainly, we invite as many people as possible to our district website to encourage people to look at our referendum tab. It's right off the district, right, and now it's actually on all the school websites as well too, because it is a living document right now, and we keep updating and providing people more and more information. Mr. Nazar mentioned the FAQ. We've set up a dedicated email address so that we can certainly address the questions in a more efficient manner, but also be able to glean what are some questions that may be very common across the town. So this way we can update our FAQ. So that it's a continuum, it's a living document, but there will be a great deal of community meetings that are scheduled from after the questions are approved that are on the agenda tonight. There will be many meetings to make people aware that live in town, and there are many people that are not members of the school district, and we're sensitive to that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just don't know if a lot of people are going to know to go to the website or even know this is happening, and I'm just wondering how we're getting the word out. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, can I comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I share Mrs. Resnick's concern, to be honest. But I think it's one of those deals where we're a victim of circumstances. We can't do the things that I think she would want us to do, which would be holding, a town hall or having like, something where people would come in and we'd show them, different things until we pass a resolution. Well, that's fine. That's what's hopefully will happen tonight. But we can't pass the resolution until the state gave us permission to do the questions, to get the referendum. Yep. So, to get the resolution. So everything we're doing is kind of like we have to kind of check this box before we move to the next box. And I think the public sometimes thinks like, well, hey, you guys should have done this, whatever. We're literally been, I know Mr. Buffin, Mr. Nasser, who work in this field, they gave us a heads up, like, hey, we'll get this in, we'll get it in fast. We know how the state is, but, you never know. They deal with this stuff on a continual basis. So we were hostage to the state to some degree, and we can't do the meetings, right? It would be imprudent, as some people would say, well, I can't have a meeting to tell you, hey, let's talk about this referendum. If the state doesn't approve that question, then we're wasting our time, and then people would say, well, what are you doing? You're giving us bad information. So we couldn't have the things that the community outreach until we got approval from the state. Now that we do, we have basically 6 weeks to do the things we need to do. I know that's going to be on the top of Dr. Hanrahan's agenda, is literally community outreach. I think that's probably one of the most important things on her plate right now. As well as Dr. McCann. So I think both of those people and the administration are going to be working hard on creating, right, community outreach, somehow meetings with the community leaders, different groups.
Yes.
Again, maybe it's something where, we could have, like you said, maybe we promote that address a little heavily. Yep. Anybody who wants to be involved in it, put your name in, and we can have a date where they can come and ask more questions. Because I agree that it does seem like I have friends of mine who know I'm on the board, and I'll be talking about the referendum. They're like, what are you talking about? Don't know anything about it. Oh, really? You're having a referendum? Like, they're totally clueless. If you don't get the Asbury Park Press or the Co-Star, and you're just living your life, you have no idea. And if you don't have kids, you really don't have no idea. So I do think it's an opportunity, now that we're getting this passed by a resolution, that we can really ramp up the next step of, okay, people, this is what it is, this is what we're doing, this is how much it's going to cost, this is how it affects you. Let's get into the weeds a little bit more. And I think that over the next month is where we need to really focus a lot of our energy.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, because really at best to actively engage the community without having the questions approved by the Board of Education, at best would be disingenuous, at best. So thank you for that. Exactly. So it's a chicken and the egg situation.
Mr. Nasser, I think.
I didn't really have anything to say other than, we are planning a virtual town hall. The date is, we're still trying to shake out the schedule on that. And I mean, I'm more than happy to walk people through. I will talk about boilers till your ears fall off. So, you know, that's the type of thing I take interest in. It's what I do for a living, and, you know, I find it interesting. So I look forward to that.
And just so everybody realizes too, don't go by social media postings and hearsay. Go to the district website. If you don't see it on the district website, just assume that it's not true. You know, that's how you filter out disinformation. And, you know, since there's been so much talk of that in the news with Twitter and social media, but go to the district website. That's the best place. Is there anybody else?
Hello, Susan Pace, Wall Township. I had a question, really. I was looking at, and I really wish the PowerPoint was back, or the Google Slides were back up. I'm really struggling with my phone. But the, when or where, and please direct me if it's already on the website somewhere, is there a true itemized list of say, for instance, the renovate the classroom? I'm hearing that there are leaks coming through the rooms. Is that the renovation that we're looking at, or are we renovating classrooms to maybe cut them in half so that there are more rooms? So I don't know what the renovation means. Now, I was able to see a beautiful description of what had to be done in the auditorium at the high school, but I don't see that for all of the pieces that are on there. So am I missing it, or is it just not available yet?
Well, I'll answer this one. We're not looking to separate classrooms. Let me say that.
Okay, that's great.
Some of the terms, we'll get into the details on the 15th with. We're focused more on the questions this time around. We wanted to get this sheet out there just so that the public sees as itemized as we can get within this context right now. When we talk about the details of what the actual scope of the project is going to entail, in other words, this is the project, I'm ready to put it out to bid, and contractors are going to bid on what is in there. That step is what happens after the referendum is approved. We've done general designs in order to create budget numbers, but within and it helps if you have the facilities assessment as a reference, because the facilities assessment that we originally did, and I believe that is on the communications tab.
I believe so.
Yeah,
right?
if you go on the website, the referendum tab at the top, there's different pages under that. The communications tab is where you probably found something that looks like this, that has the itemized list.
Yeah.
There's another document in there that has the full facilities assessment and has a little bit more context than what is just in here. I would look to that first to really get an understanding of why those specific line items, if there's no details in the comments column at the end, how that number was and that project was formulated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's an extensive document. I'm going to warn you. It's like, well, no, the actual facility.
Good evening, Carmine Venezia, Wall Township. Mr. Adenizio, before you gave an extensive description of how this group comes to borrow money, you told us how you had the process, but you told us the process, but where does the ideas come from? Is it made from the board or is it made from the staff?
The ideas for what projects?
Well, you've got a huge project here. How did that huge project come to fruition and people got together and say, oh, you know, we have to go out now and borrow money from it? Where did that come from?
Okay. Yeah.
That one. So again, I'm going to go back to the original facilities assessment. That original project list came from input from the board. It came from input from the staff. It came from input from our design professionals to get the overall scope. When we went in to trim it down to what we wanted to propose within the referendum, we spoke with obviously the board members within our F&F committee. We spoke with and met with each one of the principals at the schools to talk about their individual needs in each building. And We spoke with the administration to understand where the future, especially when it came to some of the programmatic improvements that are included in here, what specific scope that they were looking for, so we could try to come up with a budget figure to encapsulate that. So there was a lot of input from the staff, and I'll let our architect speak to what went into the original facilities assessment, but it was a pretty extensive group of people that contributed input to the project list as a whole.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have, I hear everybody saying we had to wait for
Mr.
this.
Venezia, just hold on one second. We're going to let the architect give a little more detail to that as well.
Do you mean I have to yield my time?
No, just...
Can't the
it's
architect
fine.
wait until I'm finished?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, I'm sorry. I have difficulty standing here because I can't see. The other question I have is we hear a lot of talk about we had to wait for the state. In other governments that I've been involved with in my life, when we had to do things that we had to wait for the state, we would make the ordinance or the resolution the way it was with the condition that it would only be approved if the state approved. In other words, we didn't really wait for the state. We just told the state, this is what we're going to do, and we're waiting for you to approve it for us. But we kept on going ahead, so we didn't have to waste all that time. Now, you people put a lot of time into this. So what I'm saying, isn't there a way to do this? Because the state has been known at the last second sometimes to pull money away and say, oh, we have something else to do. What do we do then?
Would you like to answer that, or?
No, it's
well,
kind
no,
of
we did not have the ability to pre-approve something and say, well, assuming, because first of all, it's 18 projects, and we didn't know.
Why not?
Because it's not allowed.
Who said it's not allowed?
Can Athena jump in and explain
You're a board,
the law on this?
excuse me one second. You're a board that we, the people, have elected to represent us with our money and to give us your fiduciary responsibility. Why are you not allowed to do that?
It's a heavily regulated process, and each step of it requires state approval before you're able to proceed. So while maybe in other municipalities or other experiences that you've had, you've been able to sort of pre-approve subject to state approval, this process doesn't permit it that way.
It would seem to me that this process, which is obviously very extensive because a lot of you people put a lot of time into this, waiting on other people to do, could have been done a little bit quicker and a little more with local control. That's all. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Architect. I didn't mean to be rude to you. I just don't stand up here too long without being able to see. Thank you.
Understood. So the facility assessment process that we went through back in 2019 and the latter part of 2020, the initial phases, we met with the administration, discussed what their what their needs were, what the the obvious pieces that they knew that they were missing, and we scheduled surveys to go out to each building, each part of any property that the district owned, including any of the fields or sub-properties, including the one on Bailey's Corner Road, and performed a assessment survey of each one of those properties. This included doing a walk inside the building, on the exterior of the building, on the roofs of the building, and also with our consulting electrical, mechanical engineers, reviewing all of the equipments that are part of any one of the buildings or schools in the district. As part of that whole effort, we developed a report and a whole bucket list of all of the potential projects that could be looked to be done within the next 10 years. After developing that report, we met with the administration, pared that down into a list of priorities. So obviously, whichever ones had the highest priority, 1 to 3 years, that's probably your priority 1 items. Anything from 3 to 5 years out, that is in your priority 2. Anything 5 years or later, that's what we categorize into priority 3. And then we did a presentation to the Board of Education on the finalized report. I believe it was back in December of 2019.
Well, let me chime in too. Can I just ask the gentleman a quick question? You were part of Jersey City's board, if I remember correctly? Were you part of Jersey City's board, if I remember? Okay, so that was covered under one of the SDA districts where a lot of the capital project costs were paid for directly by the state. Because this specific project involves securitization of our debt, in other words, we have issuance of bonds, we took a more conservative approach because those bondholders are going to be looking for specific projects to take place. There's an extra step in there that prevents us from being able to release information before we're 100% sure, because people are voting based on that information. So when we put out any project details, we need to make sure that that's what the actual final product is going to look like. It's a different process when we go from SDA to a project that's financed by a bond referendum. It's as frustrating for us as it is for you, trust me.
Can I ask the architect a question? I
your
know in
time's up.
2019,
Ms.
you
Cross,
didn't
please sit down. Your time
inspect
is
the
up.
central school trailers.
Ms.
Was there a
Cross.
reason for that?
Point of order.
Did somebody ask
Ms.
you
Cross,
not
your time
to?
is up. You're disrupting the meeting now.
In 2000.
Point of
Your
order.
time is
Point
up,
of
Ms.
order.
Cross.
Point of order.
You're disrupting the
Point
meeting.
of order.
You are disrupting the meeting. Please sit down. Please sit down. You had your time, and all you've done is call out and disrupt the meeting.
Mrs. Cross, you've been saying that since I've been elected to the board. So before we even had any numbers, you've been saying that. So why would we think any differently?
All right,
Please
stop yelling.
stop calling out. It's extremely disruptive to the meeting and to every other person who wants to participate. Thank you.
Is there anybody else for question, comment? Okay, seeing none, we will close public comments on the special presentation. We will open up for public comment on agenda action items. Those are the 2 items we will be voting on this evening. Please come up to the mic and state your name for the record. What?
Betsy
3?
Cross, is this on?
3 things. 3 things, yes.
Is this on?
It sounds like it.
Is it? Now it is. Betsy Cross, I live in Wall Township.
3.
I just have a question. I'm just not sure why we are voting on Tracy Handerhand's contract when she signed a contract when she started for 3 years. By a show of hands, who actually saw...
There is no show of hands, Ms.
Who
Cross.
actually saw the contract costs for
This is-
Dr. Handerhand before they're voting tonight?
It's public
Anybody?
comment, not public question, so please provide your comments.
Okay. Did
Thank you.
anybody see the contract cost for Tracy Handerhand?
Thank you.
Because now we're well over $300,000 for her. When she came on, she had no experience, and we've had a lot of disruption in the school system. She had half days when Manasquan was open full day a mile away. Craziness with the masks, kids getting screamed at. They weren't doing that in Manasquan. They were not doing it over
That's
there.
not on the agenda this evening.
Her contract is. We've had the football scandal.
There's
We're paying
nothing about
her-
any scandals or any other
Yeah,
kind
there
of
is.
thing
You
you're
got a
gonna make
bunch of
up.
lawsuits against you. Yes, there is. You have had, we're paying Ms. Sergio to sit home $800 a day roughly.
That's not on the agenda, Ms. Cross.
We're paying her old boss, $650 a day. Didn't even send out an email to the parents.
Point of order.
Yes, Ms.
This
Cross,
is all with her contract. Her
None of this
contract
is
should
about
not
her
be
contract.
reopened.
It doesn't
It's an
relate to
agenda
her
item.
contract.
It's an agenda item.
It's public comment
Don't
on
talk
her
during my
contract.
time, Athena Cornell.
Then
Please be
please
quiet.
Please comply with the decorum of the
Be
meeting.
quiet, Athena Cornell. This is
Point of
my
order.
time.
I would look in the
Her
mirror, Ms.
contract
Cross.
should not be voted on tonight. It should be tabled, and you can vote on it when it comes up, when her contract ends at the end of June. You don't get to vote on it now before an election. It's not right. Because in another month, she could say, guess what, everybody? I want another 20 grand.
False information.
The 21,000, the 9 of you can pay. If you want to pay it tonight, the 9 of you can divide the 21,000 and pay it. No.
The board is able to vote on the contract, so
Right.
again,
No
it's false
other
information.
taxpayer. Be quiet, Athena Cornell.
Ms.
False
Cross,
information,
please
Ms.
stop being
Cross.
rude.
It's 21,000 retroactive. You're trying to give her a raise. If the 9 of you want to pay it, go ahead and do it. Do not, on my behalf or any other taxpayer, give her the extra money.
Mrs.
She
Cross?
signed a contract to work for $199 and change, not for $220.
This would have been a great opportunity for you to take your seat on the board because you could have voted on this.
Right, and you should have
All
not
right.
used my son's picture
All right,
and
Ms.
settled
Cross,
the lawsuit,
that is
right?
not on the agenda.
That's what you should have done.
All right, Ms. Cross, thank you.
You
Your
don't
time
have
is
any
up.
seat on the
children.
board when
You
my
don't
com-
have
Ms.
any
Cross,
What
children.
does that matter?
Ms. Cross,
I
your
took
time is
my
up.
seat on the board when people elected me.
Your time is up, Ms. Cross.
Vote no on the contract.
Is there anybody else for public comment?
Ellie Rezick, Wall Township. Okay, so I had something long I was going to read, but I'm just going to get to my questions at the end. And just to kind of build upon what Betsy Cross was saying. So the initial contract for Dr. Handerhan was 3 years. And this year there was a salary, and it appears, and I could be wrong, but it appears that tonight they're voting on retroactively raising her pay for this year by almost $21,000. I mean, that's, as I read this spreadsheet that I saw. So at the bottom, there was like a footnote, and it said, 2% increase per year. But that, it's the exact dollar amount is $20,659 to be paid retroactively starting July 1st, which is a 12.6% increase for her pay for this year. For this school year we're talking about. This is the third year in the contract. So I just don't understand how that complies with the 2% increase that was specified. And if, what justifies this? I guess that's my question. Like, it seems like it's over the 2%, and then what justifies this increase right now? If it has to do with the acting principal role during the summer, because it's pretty much during the summer. We had Mr. Davis, then Dr. Hanrahan stepped in, and now we have the new person. That shouldn't be built into her salary going forward. It should be like a stipend, kind of one-time payment for that role, and not built into her salary going forward. Because if you multiply that out 4 times, the cost, say if it was related to the acting principal role, the total would be almost $83,000 for that. So I don't know. I guess I'm just wanting to know what clarification on that amount. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hanrahan, last time I was here, I asked you why you wanted your contract renewed. And you went on to say that you want, I'm not quoting you verbatim, but my general idea was that you felt that you wanted to go on to help the students do better. So why would we give you a raise if the students didn't do better in the tenure that you've already had? Our ranking in Wall Township went down 16 percentage points since the time you were the superintendent of schools, yet you want to be rewarded for that. The #1 school system in the state of New Jersey, the superintendent there gets a salary of $240,000. You want a salary of $220,000. That school system is #1 in the state. We are not #1 in the state. We're 128th in the state. I'm sorry? 136. Well, that's a big improvement of 128. Okay. So you feel that you should be rewarded for failure, basically. I don't understand why. Why can't you wait until next year when your contract is up, earn the contract, and then the board will gladly give you a contract? Why do you need it now? We're in a dire time of economic woe, especially in this particular state. We're facing all kinds of increases, gasoline increases, grocery increases, due to the inept condition of the way our federal government is run. And you want to pile on more in addition to this referendum. I think that in the best interest of the school, Ms. Hanrahan, you can show how good you want to do the school district by not accepting a new contract now. Thank you.
Anybody else for public comment on agenda action items? Seeing none, we will close public comment. Yes. Yes.
All right, so I did want to touch on a couple of things that came up. The existing contract for Dr. Hanrahan was 3 years, meaning at the end of this fiscal year, it was due to expire. We need to give a 180-day notice, which is a 6-month notice, to Dr. Hanrahan, yes, per the contract, to her.
Please stop yelling out, Ms.
talking.
Cross. Ms. Cross, you are disrupting the
It's
meeting.
in writing. So, in the
Please stop calling out.
election is not, the election is irrelevant to this conversation. What is relevant to the conversation is that when we look at trying to, and it was a valid question the gentleman asked, you know, why do it now? And everybody's asked, why do it now? We have to look at, from a continuity standpoint, the leadership within this district and make a decision of whether or not we want to be able to continue that for the next few years. When we look at future, I want everybody to keep in mind, we just finished negotiating a teacher's contract. We're going through strategic planning right now. We're talking about referendum. We are, as a board, making an attempt to arm this community with all the tools that it's going to need to succeed into the next 3 to 5 years. That's our job. That's what we're here to do. When we look at the contract costs, in order
Please
to do
stop
that,
calling out, ma'am.
we have to look at comparisons to other districts, and there's been plenty of comparisons to other districts to understand that that base salary is not out of line that we're offering. If anything, it's an equalization in order to maintain staffing. Additionally, when we talk about the additional benefit costs
Point of
that
order.
are...
Adam, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure. Everybody
I'm
else is.
sorry, ma'am. Please stop interrupting this meeting. Please stop interrupting this meeting. Give everyone else the same courtesy that you have gotten. No, you may not. You may not. You had your chance. Let him finish uninterrupted, please. It's common courtesy, ma'am. Ironic. Yes, you do.
Let's talk about backup.
That's very ironic coming from you, Ms. Cross.
Let's talk about backup, because one of those backup documents that was cited was the total contract costs, which there has been a lot of buzz around insurance costs. And one thing that is conveniently left out of the conversation is the fact that this district is self-insured. What does that mean? It means that that contract cost, that $40,000 that's included within that document, is not a premium that gets paid out of district. It is an approximation of the cost that we have to provide per law within that document. Whether, and I'm not going to get into anything personal on this, we pay her actual health bills. She pays us. Those premiums that come out of her paycheck go back into our coffers in order for us to then pay out of our self-insured fund. Mr. Smythe, do I have that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So you have to understand the context.
Stop calling out, Ms. Cross.
Beyond that, because the numbers that you're citing are being taken out of context and being taken, you clearly misunderstand how this works. So I'm going to say I have no problem with this contract. It's our turn to comment right now. Dr. Handerhan served in the position for 4 months, broken down that $20,000 over 4 months, divided by the days, I believe was an average of $250 a day, which is significantly less than what we're paying an interim right now. So I have no problem with this for this year, locking it in and then being able to lock in some continuity into the future. That's the last thing I'm saying.
Stop interrupting, ma'am.
Is there anybody else for public comment on action items? Seeing none? What?
You already closed it?
Oh, I'm sorry, we did close it.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I will point out, though,
Yes.
just to clarify some other misinformation with regard to the health benefit question, that Dr. Handerhan pays 1.5% of the premium.
Public comments closed.
Okay, you just said there's public
I
comment.
closed it already. I made a mistake. It's
Well,
closed.
then I'm sorry. I'm going to be here anyway.
Well, no, you're not. Public comment is closed. It was closed. I called for people. Nobody came up. And
And
then
then
we
we got
answered a
told
question.
that we couldn't come up.
That was a mistake on my part. Public comment is closed.
Well,
Thank
then
you.
you eat the mistake, Ralph. I'm not
No.
going to eat
And
it.
you already spoke.
But now we're talking about something different.
No. You get one 5-minute
What are you,
go-around.
like a baby? I mean, really? No. Come on, this is about the public. We are
What?
the taxpayers. I'm not
Okay,
sure if you
thank
people
you.
realize that, but we're the
You're-
taxpayers. We have a
You've
right
already,
to ask
you've already gone.
questions.
Thank you.
We have a right
Please
to
sit
ask
down.
questions.
You don't have a right to disrupt the business
I'm
meeting.
not disrupting
You had an
you.
opportunity to speak.
And I was
Please, please sit
No,
down.
I'm not going.
Well, you're not going to comment any further, ma'am.
Okay, then I will stay right here.
Okay, then it will disrupt the meeting.
Can we take a recess?
Sure,
Sure.
no problem.
Can I have a motion to take a recess?
Yes.
Can I have a second? All in favor? Okay. Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you.
No, thank you, ma'am. No.
Okay, Mr. Buffa.
Here.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Hodnett?
Here.
Mr. Maliv?
Here.
Mr. Nasser?
Here.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Here.
Ms. Stites? Mr. Wondrak? Here. Mr. Adenizio?
Here. This time I will ask for a motion for number 5A.
I'll make that motion.
Could I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Stites, any discussion, questions? Seeing none, Mr. Smythe, roll call, please.
That's the contract, right?
Yes.
Okay.
5A.
And only because it is on the floor, I just want to clarify some of the comments with regard to the health benefits, because I don't want there to be misinformation that Dr. Handerhan contributes 1.5% of the premium for medical benefits or health benefits. That is incorrect. In accordance with the contract and what's in practice is Dr. Handerhan, because she was hired after July 1, 2020, has to adhere to Chapter 44, which for someone who exceeds a salary of $125,000 a year is required to contribute 7.2% of the premium equivalent. So just to give an idea with regard to percentages, and it's 7.2% of her salary, which is with a max of $125,000, and that's just for medical prescription. Dental coverage, there's a contribution in accordance with Chapter 78, which is 35% of the premium for the dental. And when you take the 7.2% of the $125,000 max for contributions in accordance with Chapter 4, works out to be a little over 26% of the medical and premium, the medical and prescription premium in the educator's health plan. So it exceeds over $10,000. So I just want to clarify that the contract does not allow contribution of 1.5% of premium. So,
thank you.
I just want to clarify too, we did go back and look. I misspoke. It is not 180 days. You were correct. It is 90 days per the contract. So I did want to go back and make that clarification.
Mr. Smythe, roll call, please.
Mr. Buffa?
Yes.
Stop interrupting.
Mr. Hall?
Point of order.
No.
Ms. Hodnett?
I have to abstain.
Mr. Maliv?
I have to abstain as well.
Mr. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Yes.
Ms. Stites?
Yes.
Mr. Wondrak?
Yes.
Mr. Adenizio?
I have to abstain as well.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a motion for number 7 on the agenda, designation of signatories?
I'll move that.
We have a second on that. Mr. Buffa, any questions, comments? Seeing none, Mr. Smythe, roll call, please.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. Hodnett?
I have to abstain.
Mr. Maliv?
Yes.
Mr. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Yes.
Ms. Stites?
Yes.
Mr. Wondrak?
Yes.
Mr. Adenizio?
Yes, and I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Buffa?
Oh,
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
hey, we're,
Did you
okay,
know what it felt like to be president for a second there?
we're all off a little bit. I back up to number 6, the Human Resources Report. Can I have a motion on that?
I'll move it.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Sanfilippo, any questions, comments, discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Smythe, roll call, please.
Ms. Hodnett?
Yes.
Mr. Maliv?
Yes.
Mr. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Yes.
Ms. Stites? Mr. Wondrak?
Yes.
Mr. Buffa?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
And Mr. Adenizio?
Yes, yes, and I'm sorry, number 5B, bond proposal questions for referendum. Could I have a motion on that?
I'll grant that motion.
Motion, Ms. Hodnick, could we have a second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Stites. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, Mr. Smythe, roll call, please.
Mr. Maliv?
Yes.
Mr. Nasser?
Yes.
Mr. Sanfilippo?
Yes.
Ms. Stites?
Yes.
Mr. Wondrak?
Yes.
Mr. Buffa?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Ms. Hodnett?
Yes.
Mr. Adenizio?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, that is everything. All right, this time we will open up for public comment on school-related issues. Please come to the microphone and give your name for the record.
I'll start again. Sarah Venezia, Ramshorn Drive, Wall Township, New Jersey. Dr. Handerhan, we already discussed one of my children and a situation that you agreed needed to be addressed. It took a month for the VP of Wall High School to get back to me. We had a very nice meeting, an hour and a half with curriculum heads and Mr. Davis, and they agreed with me that there were some egregious acts that occurred in his grading, and that there were some misgrades put down, and they would get back to me. Then 3 weeks later, I receive an email from an admin that had nothing to do with what we were talking about, that basically started the district last April, who told me, basically, too bad, your kid graduated, nothing we can do for you. So I have been trying to get in contact with you, Mr. Davis, anyone that will listen to me, and I have been completely ignored. Now, you were the one that said to me that you were going to make, a meeting happen, and you said to me, good luck with your kid, but nothing happened. It got squashed, even after people had agreed with what I was complaining about. Can you please explain how that happened? I know you don't do that, but maybe you could just do it this time, because we're talking about a child. We're talking about a student that was in your care, and this is mine right now, but it could be anyone's, anyone else's. So I know that last time you said that you care about kids, and that's why you do this. I haven't seen it. I'd like to see it. It would be nice. It would be refreshing. It would make me feel better about your raise. Thank you.
Carmine Venezia, Wall Township. To address what Mrs. Venezia just said, since this issue came to my attention, what I did was I called the State Department of Education, and they sent to me that I just got 2 days ago a kit to have someone from the state mediate this issue with you guys, because you didn't want to do it yourself. So now we'll turn it over to the state. Maybe we'll get some fair representation for my son. Thank you.
Betsy Cross, I live in Wall Township. I have to say I was a little bit taken back here that I've had 3 police officers come over to me and ask me to come in the hallway. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, come in the hallway. I'm sorry, why do I have to come in the hallway? And they said, because Mike Dugan pointed you out.
Please address your comments to the chair.
Mike Dugan pointed you out.
Please address your comments to the chair.
I said, pointed me out for what? And I got no answer. Not going in a hallway with anybody. This is appalling. We have 3 police officers standing back here, and you were renewing a contract that you didn't have to renew. I told you that. I've been telling you that for months. And now when you post it, oh, Adam, oh, Betsy, you were right. Yeah, I was right. You should have tabled the vote. We don't get to go back and give her $220,000 in July. It's ridiculous. And you need to have people hold you accountable. That's what we're trying to do. It's ridiculous that you're calling the police on people that are coming up here asking you questions you're still not answering. How many private PTO meetings has Mr. Smythe had with parents? Because parents are contacting me. Oh, we're going on a Zoom call. Mr. Smythe says he's at a soccer game with his son. Oh, please pass the referendum. I asked you, how many times have you done that? Ellie asked a great question. What are you doing for everybody else? That's right, keep them in the dark, have it on December 13th, hope the seniors don't show up, because they would like to save $185,000 if that's what their house is worth, the average home.
It's not
This is
$185,000.
sneaky. $185. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. $185. I think the senior's going to say, you know what? I'm on a fixed income. Are you laughing, Athena Cornell? It's disgusting. You're despicable. You really are.
Are you done
Start
insulting people, Ms.
answering
Cross?
questions. I submitted questions on the referendum. How you don't know how much extra it's going to cost to have the referendum on December 13th is the reason why you shouldn't have it.
Point
It's
of clarity.
ridiculous.
Yes,
Was that question answered?
absolutely it was.
Right, you
asked
don't
and
know
answered.
the answer. That was the answer.
And it was
We can't
explained
make it up,
why we
Mrs.
can't.
Cross.
Right,
We
he
explained
should have
why.
known this months ago. And the fee for the last referendum was $40,000. So if it's $75,000 for the,
You're
to have it
speculating.
off December.
You're
Well, get
speculating.
the number, Ralph. I've been asking you for months to get the number, and you
It's
still
been
don't
asked and
have it.
answered multiple times.
Right, and you still don't have the answer, Athena
Asked and
Cornell.
answered,
because
Betsy
you're a
Cross.
bad attorney. You're terrible. Get answers. Don't have architects sneak in and then say, oh, you can't ask the questions, Mrs. Cross. That was ridiculous. You told us, come November 1st, you can ask the architect questions. Well, guess what? No, you can't if you're Betsy Cross. You can't.
You asked questions tonight.
Right. And
Right,
I
you
didn't
did.
get the answer. I wanted to ask and get me the answer. Why didn't they inspect the trailers? That was the
That's
only
not part of
thing
the
they
referendum,
didn't-
Ms. Cross.
The
We're
trailers
done with
was
that.
always part of the referendum.
No,
Always.
it's
It's not part of the
Always.
referendum, Ms.
Okay.
Cross. Thank you.
The great thing is, Mr. Smythe has now been deposed for the trial. For the lawsuit you're being sued at, he is the first
Not
person
relevant
deposed.
to the
It is
referendum,
very relevant.
ma'am.
Because I cannot wait till that transcript comes out, and he has to finally answer questions of why he put teachers and staff in those filthy, disgusting trailers.
Which he did not,
and
Ms.
lied,
Cross.
and lied and said that the architect inspected them when he did not. He was
The
a
only
licensed
person who is
engineer.
lying here is you.
No,
So
I'm
please
not.
stop.
So when we get to subpoena and depose Mr. Smythe, Ted Hopkins,
Not we.
from Mobile Lease, you're not involved, Miss Athena.
Neither
You're
are
not.
you,
It's
other
Goldman
than
Sagara.
volunteering to be
I am
involved
giving
in the
all
litigation.
of my information to that
which we've
attorney.
become aware of.
All of that information.
Okay.
They will have everything they need.
Great.
Everything. And hopefully,
They
this
always
time,
have.
we get to the truth on the 3 ridiculous investigations that have happened right now.
The truth has been
Mr. Smythe
out,
still hasn't
and it's
answered
not
if he was
relevant
even
to your
interviewed.
commentary, clearly.
Answer the question, Mr. Smythe. Did you ever agree to be interviewed for all 3
Please
investigations?
direct your comments
from the
to
Monmouth
the
County
chair, Ms.
Prosecutor's
Cross.
Office, Dr. Cram, and
Please
from
direct your
Anthony
comments to
Cornell.
the
Thank you,
chair.
Ms. Cross.
Ralph
Your time is
Adonisio,
up, Ms.
answer
Cross.
the question.
Your time is up. Thank you.
So answer
Thank
the
you.
question.
Your time is up. Is there anybody else for public comment? Seeing none, we will close public comment. No other business. I would like to say one thing, though. We have a great school system. I mean, incredible. We've had a lot of great graduates that go on to do many great things, and I want to acknowledge a graduate, Justin Godnick, who's a meteorologist with News 12, who's actually moving on to an NBC station in Boston, who last winter we were in contact with quite a few times with some iffy storms that we weren't sure. We didn't want to close school too quick or jump the gun. But it's nice when you hear about alumni that go on and continue doing great things. So I want to wish him the best of luck at his new station up in Boston, and to all the other alumni who do great things every day. With that, can we have a motion to adjourn? Anybody? Was there anybody else have anything? I'm sorry. Ms. Stites?
I would just encourage people to go to the website prior to that meeting on November 15th so that you can really see the breakdown that's been posted of that information. I think it's really important that people look at it so that, they're kind of primed for questions that they may have that night. Super important, and I hope that certainly we make every effort to get the information out to all of our stakeholders across Wall.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to thank our local law enforcement for joining us tonight. It's a shame that they had to. And I think it's funny that somebody's surprised at why they do when we have cameras, supporting cameras that observe our meeting. But we appreciate your support and we value the partnership we have.
Yes. Thank you. Anybody else? Nope. All right. So can we have a motion to adjourn? Motion, Mr. Weinberg. Can we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? No. All right. Thank you. Good evening, everyone.